the hour, so we're going for it a little bit early. We'll see how the things run. You can see my patrons on the screen. Thank you very much for all the assistance in keeping the old RJ going and the endless project of crushing creationists under our heavy grip of scholarship. Okay, let us close off the sharing and proceed with what we got going. This is kind of an odd week for old replacing Darwin here because he had no really new sources underfoot, but instead I stumbled across a chart that he's got. Eventually he's going to be having a whole slew of these linear speciation timelines that he is putting in for all of these different species. And I got to figure out how he's arriving at those. And at least a few of them I think are paleontologically preposterous. But at any rate, along the way, we got this chart. Isn't that cute? I'll kind of get this up to the screen so you can kind of see what it all is, which is basically a layout of the mammal species that have, or families that have 25 species or more, and he's laying out whether or not he can find mitochondrial DNA for them, which he's going to be using for his subsequent charts. And it was obvious that he was leaving an awful lot of stuff out, and there are an awful lot of species that are families that have only like a single species and things like that. That's not really the fun part that I was starting to dive into. It had to do with the listing of the kinds, which theoretically each of those are. Typically families or kinds in the creationist context. And how that's going to match up against the arc encounter list, which is going to become a massive appendix in volume 2 of The Rocks Were There. Nobody's really done a full press analysis of how they constructed their list and how it connects up to the creationist literature, how it connects up to systematics and all the rest. So there were a bunch of peculiarities, though, that I was noticing on this. He's terribly concerned about the percentage of the species that has mitochondrial DNA available. And all of this was doing was listing off how many species per family there are, how many mitochondrials in theory, how many of them can he get theoretically a mitochondrial DNA for. He hasn't really explained how he arrives at that number, but most of them are perfectly, well, all but one is okay. And it happens to be down the road when we look at the, where are we in here? Trying to find our little cats. Oh, there we go. I thought I'd put a little box around that little puppy. Sometimes I didn't think that was working. I have this on my other screen on my PC here. Okay, let's see. That's what we wanted. Anyway, he lists off 38 species per family in the Felidae, and of which there are 35 that he can find species for. But the number for the species in theory is 39. So the percentage of species in the family is 103%. How exactly is he thinking he can have a theoretical number of mitochondrial DNA that's one higher than the number of species in the family? I don't know how that comes about. That one is of less interest than one down the road. See, he is only listing off about 40 species in this chart, of which a much smaller number are ones that he was able to get the mitochondrial DNA for. Curiosity, I want to know what he's leaving out. So I found a listing, which I'll be putting a link to, from Gordon Rammel, an ecologist who made up a list in 2020, because an awful lot of them list species and genera and others. I needed to know the family level and how many of those there are. And it was a fairly good list, and I'm cross-checking against that to create a master list. And while I was plowing through that, I discovered that lurking amongst the obscure rodents is a family, Echimaidae, the spiny rats, Hutias, Nutria, and Capiu, that are presumably lumped together as a single family unit in Jensen's list, because he's got 87 species in the family. But in this other list from 2020, they're broken down into 3 different groups. The Echimaidae, the Capromyidae, and the Microcastoridae that have 69, 13, and 1. That add up pretty much to about the same number. So they're fairly close. So what I'm going to be intrigued with is comparing that with the Ark Encounter list. Do they have a single kind of Echimaidae, or do they have more than 1, even maybe 3? And all of that would involve to what extent they are relying on evolutionary systematics to decide what's in a family. And that instantly becomes a kind. So if the listing in Jensen is different from the one in the Ark Encounter, then that would be interesting, is that they managed to take the same critters and make them more than 1 kind or fewer kinds purely based upon other people's works, not of their own, not with any of their own criteria. Or they may match up completely. They may have exactly that Icomora, in which case will mean, is it the case that the creationists are being rather broad in their acceptance of what falls within a kind? We've got the big blob that's got 69 species in it, but what about those little oddballs? Why are we lumping them in? And will that turn out to be as systematically as broad a brush as in other areas where they would be maybe not including things as the same kind or not? So all of this is going to be getting into the nitty-gritty elements. Now, the other bigger part of the show, the part 2, relates to slime. Our good old friend slime. If anybody's been knocking around long enough to remember, Kent Hovind and some of the other creationist lecturers along the line will be saying, evolutionists think you evolved from slime. They got the thing against slime. I mean, that's a very inventive stuff. Well, it turns out that this is a feature that gets discussed a lot in the creationist literature. From July 21, Smart Slime. And then there's that walks from McQueen and Catchpool back in 2000. Brian Thomas on slime networks are better organized than railway systems. This is all falling in by whaling to the Gee Whiz. Wow, ain't nature clever? Bet. Don DeYoung, slime mold, mindless map makers, and all that. And what this actually relates to is in part the issue about what does intelligence means when you don't have a brain. How can things that appear intelligent be doing so as a natural process? And the other issue that comes up in the little slime is the whole issue of how individual cells can end up being organisms in some of the kids down the road, including. And so I'll be putting the posts in to McQueen and Catchpool and Catchpool 2001, who are riffing off a brand new, it's relating in turn that ultimately riffs off a 2021 paper in PNAS, and then there's stuff from AIG from 2011 and all that. So anyway, I'll be putting all the links up to all that stuff. And regarding particularly the older Tom post from back in 2010, Hudgen reminded that, quote, the ability of biological self-organization is one of the many facts that creationists refuse to accept, even when the evidence is right in front of them. And so you'll be able to follow up on that. There's also, I wish I could have found a full text link to a 2011 Dickinson paper on the polarized epithelium elements that are thought to be part of a metazoan feature that turn out to actually connect up with the slime mold structure. And but there's a commentary paper on it that is open access, and I'll be putting the link to that in. There's also some recent work in such Star Trek to the literal nothing from creationism, because it's revealing how so much of this creationist stuff is just recycling the older apologetics and not paying attention, and certainly not doing their own biological. There's a 2019 paper from Vidal Henrik from Nature that you'll hopefully find interesting, and another one from 2022 by Torre et al., which is relevant to the multicellularity issue and the origin of fungi and all of that, who are a very diverse group. Way more fungi are spectacularly more diverse than even insects. All the animals put together, I don't think, have as many species as fungi do in just rainforest environments, let alone the entire listing. It was just absolutely astonishing. Anyway, you'll find out, I think, a lot of fun on that part. A catch up on what I've been doing with the material for volume 2 of The Rocks Were There. Part of it certainly relates to finishing up some tidying loose ends of going through a bunch of old issues of the Institute for Creation Research Acts and Facts. I am a subscriber, fortunately at no cost. So it's nice to know they're well-heeled enough that they can give the heretic in Spokane free copies of the thing. And it's all available pretty much online. That not exactly skin off their nose, but it must take print money to be able to these glossy 20-page things. They're quite amazing. But it is kind of handy to have that hard text, because then I can go through and annotate and adjust and cross-check and all that to make sure we got everything. There's an awful lot of the same repetition material. I'm culling out the material on cosmology, planetary systems, comets, Big Bang stuff. That is all going to be in the next chapter that I'm in a moment to get that sorted out. And then I'm occasionally tumbling upon to older references that relate to stuff that's already brought up in the sections that I've already done, or material relating to geological issues that's going to be coming up in regards to the Grand Canyon and other stuff as we continue on with the writing of the volume and getting ourselves up to speed on that. So wanting to get all of that stuff out of the way so that no stone goes unturned. I don't see anyone in the chat, so I'm probably hitting everybody earlier than I should have on that topic. Yeah, what can you do? The cosmology chapter is an area that I'm not a physicist or an astrophysicist or a cosmologist, so I had a long-term interest in the thing, and I had collected quite a bit of information on it. But one nice advantage of coming back to all of that material in a way so late, now that we're actually doing a book on the subject, a book chapter on it, is that you can see the trajectory of nothing that's going on in the creationism movement. Because some of the things are, like the obsession that creationists had. Oh, hello there, Lord Quacker Squirrel. Yes, it has been a few days. There was an ongoing obsession that creationists had with ring galaxies, which are very peculiar and unusual galaxy formation, and that supposedly cannot be explained by evolutionary astrophysics. Well, it turns out actually they've seen enough of them now that they can have a pretty good idea of how that's done. So what's going to be fun to see is, do recent acts and facts pay the slight any of that material? So many other cases, the recurring themes are going to be how does nucleosynthesis work? Some of the other little sidebar issues are some of the abstruse physics, like the Higgs boson. Was there a tendency to say that it's just a fictional thing as opposed to, and you haven't found it yet. Same thing goes for dark matter and dark energy, the discussions there. The ones that ultimately has fizzled, that was a big obsession of creationists for a very long time, was the neutrino issue, and how many neutrinos were coming out of the sun. And supposedly there were way too many neutrinos if it formed from fusion, according to certain people, or was an anomaly if the sun were that old, and so forth. But it's turned out that they've worked out bit by bit, piece by piece, what the physics is and why certain neutrinos do certain things and certain things not. Ring galaxies are under, and it's still not evolution. Yeah, well, remember, this is Kent Hovind's version. And for that matter, the Institute for Creation Research and AIG, they all obsess upon these things. It's a small club. So many of these tactical issues are extremely narrow groups. So with cosmology, you've got Russell Humphreys, you've got Jason Lyle, you've got John Hartnett, and then a bunch of little asterisks that hover around the edges and sometimes do collaborative papers with them. I've actually found an example of where Hartnett had an actual astrophysics paper that he co-authored with somebody back in 2008. Doesn't look like he's done anything since on that subject. And so virtually all of his efforts have been in the venues of Answers Research Journal and the Journal of Creation and all of that. As I get farther down the road, then I'll be able to sort out whether or not there's like pecking orders as to who appears in what. There's a certain amount. Oh yeah, yes. The cosmology issue is a deep trouble for them to go into, because the astrophysics, first of all, virtually none of them are doing it. And secondly, it is kind of an expensive thing to do. You need the telescope time, and you need also the theoretical physics. So you need all that aspect. And they've also mired in a complete mess as to the notion of whether light can speed up or not, because they have to explain the bloody day 4 problem, which is how come the stars and the sun and the moon are made after the earth, and all of this is in the last 6,000 years. And why can we see Andromeda Galaxy? Isn't it 2.5 million light years away? Did the light, hitch a ride here? How does that work? And so all of it involves having to tweak the physics somehow or other. Jason Lyle favors his super lickety split speed of light, which goes out infinitely fast one direction and then back more leisurely, so that it averages out to the 300,000 kilometers per second that we all know and love in the physics world. But although technically it's impossible to be able to work out the one-way speed of light with any absolute rigor, I'd still complain that if the speed of light were variable in the actual universe, not in ancient times, but from now on all the time, shouldn't we be encountering some fast light from some directions and slow light from other directions? And wouldn't this make for some really weird anomalies? And do they redshift? I mean, what exactly do they do? So you've got a truly cosmic level of conundrum going on. And it should be pointed out that from what I can see in the astrophysics community compared to, say, geology, creationist geologists, there are more of them, not a lot more, but there are more. And they kind of bump into the geological conferences and they present papers. You see Whitmore and others, they do their little abstract. They are membership of the club so that they can put up their little display at the convention. And I'm sure the geologists go by and they smile sweetly, and then they turn the corner and go and then move on and pretty much pay no attention to it. But you do have a modicum of geologists who will do posts and criticize creationism. Kevin Hankey does this all the time on his website. What's amazing about the astronomical community is it looks like that the regular astrophysics community pays less than zero attention to them, that they very little in the way of even bothering with them. I think this may be the whole principle behind the physics bit, because it's an abstruse field. And remember, we have the famous physicist who, when he was confronted with a particular model that was being presented, and I can't remember if it was Max Planck or somebody who was being confronted with this back in 1910 or so. And the fellow said, it's not even wrong. That's the kind of contempt that you get. Hello, Amiga Nuts. Funny, then how come communications to the moon, the earth, and the moon walks wasn't instantaneous? Yes, exactly. We got that's another thing that makes astronomy so very different from biology and other areas, is that they say, well, were you there? Well, in astronomy, you are literally time traveling. This is the one science discipline. When you pick up a rock, you're looking at an object that is itself very old, but you're seeing it as it is now. But astronomy, you can't see now at all. You're seeing the moon as it was a couple seconds ago, and you're seeing the sun as it was minutes ago, and you're seeing the planets as they are hours ago, and you're seeing stars as they are centuries or millions of years ago, and on and on. When you're looking into the deep field in Hubble, you're looking back before the Cambrian explosion, like lickety split. No big deal. So time travel is literally what astronomers do. And that means that they're facing a different dynamic. We, for example, cannot know what Polaris looks like now. If you take your telescope out and look at the North Star, you're seeing as it was 400 years ago, which is like the era of Galileo. We don't know what's going on there now. Has it twinkled out completely? Has it gone nova? Probably not. But nevertheless, we won't know for a while because the light takes a while to get here. So well, yeah, there's a Crocker Squirrel brings up a point that's constantly seen in paleontology, cosmology. There's a whole bunch of areas where this pops up relentlessly, and that is that the university wants to play up the point of whatever it is they're doing. So they have a tendency to highlight stuff that's going to gather people's attention. And then particularly if it's an unskilled science reporter, they hype it up. And if you want to see the hype examples, you go over to somebody like Fox News, and they play that up all the time. And so you'll get a perfectly valid report. There was one, for example, about the degree to which the methane produced potentially from large dinosaurs might have affected some of the ecosystem in the warming temperatures of the period. And that got hyped up by Fox News. And then Rawmad, or not Rawmad's the other one, Matt Powell, who's in with Kent Hovind, escalated that into farting dinosaurs were in the extinction event. And this was all because he was relying on a really bad report. We did a thing on it on this show a ways back, and other people have called attention to the same old thing. So the main point is, in any science, I'm not paying much attention at my level of research to generic postings on these things. So I'm not looking at CNN's thing or the New York Times or even Scientific American typically. Once in a while, there will be some little abstruse issue that comes out that a Scientific American article is kind of handy to find out. That gives a good summary on it and all that stuff, because that's basically what that is. But I'm now at the stage where the meat is going after the primary sources and looking at the primary source data, not bothering about the secondary reporting, even in science literature, let alone the stuff you get farther down the stream. Yeah, this and all of the planets, by the way, get riffed on by creationists. You'll notice there's virtually no counterpart of this in the intelligent design movement. They could care less about the planets, because from that point of view, they're old, they're big, they're far away, they don't have any connection to their culture camp issues, and so they don't really bother about it. They're perfectly fine with the Big Bang. It's all copacetic with them. Young Earth creationists have a completely different model. So they are forced by the structure of the young Earth creationism to have all the planets young, and all the comets are too young. They would have disappeared, and the Oort cloud isn't really there, and you're never going to find it, and blah, blah, blah. Well, this is going to be kind of interesting for the next 10 or 20 years as we get far more sophisticated instrumentation that will finally be able to resolve some pictures or inferences about that fuzzy little Oort cloud way out there, and see things about it. Now, the earlier Kuiper belt, that's pretty much established. I mean, that's close enough that even with the instrumentation that we have, we can see. Remember, these are relatively small objects. And so trying to resolve them at that distance, you have to use like radar or various things other than just optical telescopes. It's an intricate thing to deal with. Another fun one to think about that is the whole dark matter issue. And that will be coming up in the thing. The interesting bit about matter is that, and it has more physics expertise than I do, and if this sounds absurd, let me know. But it seems to me, given the fact that dark matter is causing galaxies to rotate differently because of the effects it has on gravitation, that it's something fundamental in relating to space-time, but not matter in the hadron sense of things. And therefore, that's why it doesn't interact at other than that level. So I think ultimately when they figure out what that is and why things are the way they are, why there are giant filaments in the superstructure of the universe, that these are probably the kind of foam on the beer that occurs in the formation of space-time itself. And it'll require some really sophisticated stuff and difficult to resolve at the particle accelerator level, simply because you're now at energy levels that are so intense you can't build anything big enough to do them. So there is an upper threshold as to how much we can get out to, unless you're planning on building a particle accelerator that's the size of Mars, and to see what you can do. Yes, the geocentrics. That's a fun group. Nothing is more hilarious than to read a young Earth creationist, such as Kent Hovind, explaining why geocentrism is wrong, and suddenly they're getting all empirical and methodological naturalist and all of that, and it's just an absolute scream to deal with. And the same thing goes with flat Earth, which is an even more extreme subset of the geocentrics. But there are a bunch of them, and unlike the flat earthers, who are so peripheral that they could be hit with an asteroid and no one would ever notice. I mean, they may do little videos and stuff like that, but like Jeranism, but they don't impact much. But the geocentrics actually have kind of impacted things, off in the corners, surreptitiously. Elmendorf, who wrote the equal times creationism laws back in the 1980s, in the heyday of young Earth creationism, he was and still is geocentrist, and you can find his stuff online in various spots. And then you've got Tom Willis, the nutball from Missouri, who actually wrote the Kansas Intelligent Design Education Standards. He's a young Earth creationist, and let's be charitable and say that he is open-minded and thinks that the Earth revolving around the sun thing is not a settled scientific issue. So he's, he's straddling the divide, and he allows geocentrism as a possibility that nobody should be able. Malcolm Bowden. He goes way back, and he's still knocking around in that as well. He pops up in some really hilarious contexts too, because he was one that was trying to argue the plesiosaurs are mammals. Okay. And he is a truculent little bastard, because he does bump into a lot. And yet his views infiltrated intelligent design, because Philip Johnson, the late intelligent design guru, was converted to have doubts about Pekin man and that because of reading Malcolm Bowden's stuff. Apparently, well, he knew he was a young Earth creationist. Apparently, he didn't know that he was a geocentrist. So, Bowden does a couple videos on the line. I think I've got them on my watch someday when my brain can take it and I don't have other things up on my sleeve. The geocentric issue is a really fascinating one, because it's a perfect exemplar of methodology. And although I imagine there are some non-religious geocentrists, I can't think of any offhand, that they are hyper-conservative Christian, sometimes Catholics in the case of Elmendorf, otherwise Protestant. And from their point of view, they're following the logic of the Bible, which was a geocentric flat earth and all that as well. So, yes, 4 a.m. my time, Vandalia. Yeah, it's this is amazing that so far, week after week, it's gotten pretty good. We got nice connections this time of night, and I'm pretty sure that part of the problem was, I'm on the free tier of the studio system, and secondly, I was trying to do videos when everybody else is trying to do videos, and so I'm trying to get on the queue of an extremely crowded field, and Restream would just say, "Who are you?" and it would just never connect up properly. So I've been in an entirely different dynamic here, where I've got much better connections, much easier to get on, not a problem about being able to log in or organize. And it's patently obvious it's because of what time I was doing it. So I think it works out pretty decently that anybody that wants to catch the show, and an awful lot of people watch it at their own leisure anyway. I typically watch the various videos, even when they pop online while I'm on the computer. I'll tend to put a memo and copy the link and leave it in my sidebar and watch later. For one thing, because it's often slower on my circuit to be able to watch live. And so if I'm trying to do it, suddenly the thing of the little circles going around, blah, blah, blah. I actually have a better time of it, and I can make comments in that as I go. So it means that I'm unlikely to be in the live chat of any of the videos that pops down the road. It looks like some fun stuff that Dapper Dino. I was just listening to the piece that he and Jackson did on the Paleozoic, and they were talking about some of the screwball information that apparently a creationist paleontologist who was not named, and so I'm going to be interesting because it's a small club, was making some wacky claims about the tetrapod limb evolution and the bone structure therein that was such a dumb thing that you can't imagine how the creationists could possibly have made such a mistake. Anyway, that's going to apparently be the topic of an upcoming Dapper Dino thing, so we'll be watching that, because the whole tetrapod evolution issue is in volume 2 of the Rocks Are There, bum, bum, bum. And so that will be one to deal with. It's a lot of fun issues. I've got all that little section piled away down in my note pile. Colton and others who have seen my house when they were up before we went down to the Grand Canyon know I have my giant sorting zone on my pool table where that thing hasn't been used to play pool on in a very long time, but it is extremely functional for the ability to store. You can put papers around the edges, and I can then just move them in and parse them out into little zones and keep the stacks as high and work them around to make sure that there's kind of a thematic logic to all of it. So, well, volume 2 should be out theoretically either by the end of the year or early into 2023. We'll see. Jackson, of course, is dealing with his college work, and that he's been working on superstructure and a lot of the materialist stuff that's come up already in the various videos he does. And so I would be calling attention to some of the material, a lot of the human evolution and primate development stuff that's going to be related to that chapter. I have a huge amount of material on both the paleontology of the human evolution story and the issues on cognitive literature and the development tool use. And then, of course, a big pile of various creationics on this subject. Understandable, given the fact that this is an issue that creationists have to die on, that some of them can kind of quibble back and forth about the Heath issue and whether or not accelerated radioactive decay happens, or whether or not catastrophic plate tectonics is a thing, or floating forests, but boy, they can't have human beings evolve. They've got to keep the human beings a separate kind. They've got to make sure that there's no connection between that and any ape-like creature. They've got to make sure that Neanderthals get sucked into the human species, even though it's painfully obvious that that's not going to work. That was a delightful subject matter, because I'm old enough then to have remembered there was a brief period when the mainstream science part was kind of thinking about lumping humans and Neanderthals together, and the same thing with some of the chimpanzee issues. But as we started to get not merely more Neanderthal skulls and bodies, but got the DNA, when that came in on the scene from the 1990s on, boop, blew to smithereens any idea that they're the same species. And when they started having enough fossils that you could see, particularly of juveniles, to where you can see the teeth development patterns and this bone suturing and all that, it's just outside the range of humans. They're close cousins, but all of that. Oh, states' rights in America. Yeah, I'm not sure I'll be able to devote any time to it. I've got so many eggs on my plate here, Lamont, that I probably won't be able to do much in the way of that, in addition to the difficulties we have with StreamYard and all that. How about a recommendation for egregious? Well, it's a toughie, because you got the absolute screwball cosmology that Russell Humphreys puts up, and then you've got the screwball cosmology of Jason Lyle, and then you've got the screwball cosmology of Hartnett. And, what is the universe the center of things? There's been a certain degree in their more recent material that they backed off from a lot of these technical issues. And so it's a toss-up between Humphreys and Hartnett and Lyle, depending upon who's keeping up the bit. I think Lyle's obsessions about the speed of light thing is one that is at least deliciously consistent. And he's kind of dragging some of the creationists kind of along in the same route. But too many of them have come to acknowledge that they need a miracle to resolve some of these issues. And at that point, you're not in the sciences anymore. As I said, it's a tougher thing to do because in effect, the astrophysics community doesn't do typical criticisms of young Earth creationism. And it's because they don't pay. Yes, Jason Lyle is a presupposition on this side. Well, in their own ways, they're all presuppositions. They've all got particular assumptions that they've got to accept. I've not studied too much in terms of how their individual theologies run. We do have assorted Mormons and Greek Orthodox and various people from various denominations knocking around in the creationist community and Roman Catholics. It sounds like, and if somebody is more informed on this subject, let me know in the comments after the video and all that's put up. But my appearance of it doesn't seem that they're coming directly from like the Loma Linda Seventh-day Adventist stuff, although I seem to recall a couple of them do. But a lot of it may just come from fairly standard Protestantism. There's a variety of interviews that creationists do in various contexts at ICR, in Acts and Facts, and at CMI and the like, that I haven't delved into sufficiently to be able to ferret out, because I've never been terribly concerned about the denominations that individuals come from. I do kind of pay attention to the paleontologists and geologists who circulate around Loma Linda University, which is an Adventist operation, and they still are quite significant impact in this area. I think some of the ones in the astrophysics area kind of flow around Bob Jones University, if it serves me. They've got a little bit of a connection on in that. But they don't really have an enormous amount of institutional connections. I mean, of course, no creationist universities out there with astronomy departments, so they're not building giant telescopes. This is not the equivalent of Percival Lowell or somebody like that, who's got money bags building telescopes on top of mountains for them. That's a hobby way too expensive even for ICR. So they have to basically hitchhike off of the other material, and if they can do it theoretically. So if you're operating at a theoretical zone where you're basically doing the mathematical calculations and all that kind of stuff, and you don't necessarily have to put your eyeball up to an instrument, that's a little bit to deal with, and it's remarkably abstruse. It's a sad area for them. The fact that they've had no traction whatsoever, the fact that they're anti-Big Bang, puts them off in the netherworld. As I pointed out a little bit earlier, that it's possible it'll be out by the end of the year, but don't hold your breath on it. So there's an enormous amount still to construct on the thing. It should be out sometime in 2023. And I do have a deadline on a different book, the second Paralogs novel that I've been working on for many, many moons. And I've got a few chapters left to go on that. And I'm committed and promised my niece and her husband that I will have the book out by the time I go over there for my birthday where I turn 70 in September. So that's only got a couple months left to go. I like what I've written on it. It's a delightful theme. I know how the plot ends, so it's just a matter of hitting the marks and the points for the actual text to finish it out to the end of the bit. And at that point, then I'll be retooling, because it took an awful long time to write, because I was also doing these two books during the same period. Because once I found out how to do that thing online, then I thought, well, I should do a science book. So that's why I did Evolution Slam Dunk. And then once Jackson Wheat picked me up the idea of doing this analysis of the Answers in Genesis stuff, and it ballooned into more than one book. That's I've never allowed that to slow down and lapse, so I had to ferret around to construct the paralog storyline. Plus, it's one half of the next book. And then I also have worked out the superstructure for about 8 or 9 novels after that. So there's no doubt whatsoever that RJ will be a busy little beaver to the time I drop dead, which hopefully will be quite a ways down the road. I want to live long enough to either outlive the idiot opponents that I have, hear that, David Berlinski, or to see really neat new stuff coming down the sciences. I mean, I never thought I would live to see a day when you would be able to be talking about interplanetary systems by observation. That's another one where the creationists have had to backpedal spectacularly, because they were pretty much denying, well, they're denying the whole thing. They can't allow stars to forming currently. They can't allow planetary systems to be forming currently. The one big excitement that changes an awful lot of stuff is that so long as we had only this solar system as a model, I think even professional astrophysicists were pretty much thinking that this was kind of standard equipment in a planetary system if it has planetary systems, and that would not be all that necessarily common, but you would have gas giants farther out and little rocky planets farther in, closer to the sun. And it turns out, holy smokes, that's not true. That the rocky planets inboard is just by accident, that most of the giant gas giants occur in every possible configuration inside of various planetary systems. And it even reaches the interesting prospect that you could have stars that would have been thought of as awkward for potential life-bearing planets, that you could be on a moon of a giant gas giant that orbits close to a relatively faint sun and still be in the Goldilocks zone. How common that is in the universe and whether or not there's any life on any kind of planets like that goes back to the whole issue of how life originated and all that complexity. So we'll see how that's going. Oh, yes. Well, I will say this on the novel writing front. I will recommend this to absolutely everybody. If you have any dialogue at all in the story, make sure that you read it aloud. And in fact, read your text aloud after you're done. You can do it in any different formats. When I'm writing the sketch work for the chapters on Paralog's Fog, I do that all longhand. I don't do it on the computer. And it's very visceral. I'm in a cinema mode. I'm seeing the scenes and I'm writing down my dialogue. And I tend to read a lot of that dialogue aloud directly. And I can hear them in my head. Because if you work out your dialogue and you read it aloud and everybody sounds alike, you're basically writing the same kind of stuff. You're not creating personalities. Everybody has their particular ways of talking, their accents, their particular nuances, the kinds of analogies they like to use, the sorts of turns of phrases they do. And if you've created character development where everybody is so specific that you have to know who is saying the line in order to know how to write it, then you're on the ball. A trick to do, independent of whether it's a science fiction, a mystery, of living in the current world, or wherever it's set, forget that. As an experiment, could you set your characters down around a Monopoly table to play the game Monopoly? And how would the characters react? Could you write how they would behave, what they would say, how they would deal with stuff? If you can do that, then that's a great element. And of course, you have to think about clever plots and so forth and so on, and what's been done, what hasn't been done. I think I've got enough little wrinkles going on in the Paralogs of Fog about, I know the genres that I'm dealing with, the mystery and science fiction genres way back, and some stuff that's far enough back that people have forgotten about it, so that I can riff off of some things and make comments upon kind of stuff that's in the process of formation. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes. Well, indeed, the idea that you've got it, for one thing, has changed our dynamics about how star systems and they needed to deal with like magnetic fields. And although you're talking about compressing gas, a lot's going on in that. And if it connects up, for example, to the role that black holes play, that apparently are fairly early in the universe and form early on and act as like seeds in, think of galaxies as giant oysters where these black holes are acting as a condensation mode. And that it's changing even from what I understand of the physics. It's working on, oh yes, Lord Crocker scores his risk scores, any board game, you know, poker, wouldn't matter. It just would be showing how your characters relate to kinds of stuff, or figure out how would they drive a car or whatever, you know, any kind of a thing to focus on what their personality types are. Are they gregarious? Are they taciturn? And all of this stuff. So if you can end up writing your characters that way, I'm suddenly bouncing back and forth between astrophysics and novel writing. I apologize for the eccentricity of that. But on the star formation thing, to what extent, when we think about where habitable zones are, there was even a recent technical paper just came out a couple of years ago about the fact that what is considered like a safe zone in a galaxy to make it so that it's not too much supernovas going off and so forth changes over time as the galaxy develops. And whereas out in the low rent district, out in the spiral arm, the way we are, stars are comparatively far apart, multiple light years apart. When you get closer into that core zone, you start having stars that are really packed together. And so the internal dynamics and the way gases are exchanged and gravity and stuff is going on in that little zone around that black hole is very, very different. And so it's kind of funky to try to figure out what's going on there. Yes, yeah, that one's a good a thought experiment. I've suggested this to other people. Even there was one. Whoops! Come on, get rid of my little menu here. There we go. That they were doing a fantasy story that was set in, you know, with magic and dragons and all that kind of stuff going on. Kind of like in the Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings kind of context. And I suggested that the Monopoly game would be a perfectly good thing to do. Not to have a scene in their story, but just as a focal point to figure out how your characters function. And another thing that I make use of in the paralogs, I love people reveal a great deal about themselves when they are playing games. And that was built into the Round the World in 80 Days story, because Phileas Fogg was a pathological, and is, all in my story, a player of whist. If he's traveling on a ship, he's scouting around to see if he can find some whist players. He loves to play the game. And likewise, me, oh, hi, Justin. How are you doing, kid? Haven't seen you in a while. Is it because you are up in the wee hours? Typically, that could account for it. I've been telling everybody the fact that my signal works much better at this wee hour of the morning thing than the 7 o'clock Wednesday night when everybody is on bloody restream and it just screws everything up. So the dialogue writing part, I'm also fascinated by dinner scenes. And it's a staple in an awful lot of shows, and especially in the mystery context, you know, where you often have a dinner scene or a party scene, nightclubs and the like, in the Nick and Nora Charles Thin Man series. Just as much a cliche as the courtroom examination in a Perry Mason story or something like that. Gathering all the suspects together shtick in the drawing room that you find so often in Agatha Christie's tales. And you can play off of that because people reveal a great deal of themselves about how they behave when they're eating at restaurants, what they order, how they treat others. Is the husband a jerk who orders everything for their wife or not? And how are they in terms of how finicky they are, and and if they have kids with them, how are the kids being treated, and so forth. So these are all wonderful usages that allow you to develop conversation. And if you're doing it as a suspense tale, you can have clue points bandying about the context of all of this dinner table chatter. So I mean, there's an awful lot of fun story about it. So yeah, the restream all of this. Oh, yes, I showed. I took the politique game down when we went down to the Grand Canyon because I brought some poker chips to play poker. I bought politique and a bunch of stuff around my tarot thing so I could try some tarot games. I don't think we ended up doing that. And oh, yeah, poor kid. I mean, you for somebody that's not terribly old, you've been through a lot of deep shit. But hang in there. Wow, wow. Yeah, it must be annoying not to have the full set of plumbing on there. But do you have to be connected up to anything? I assuming this is just a disastrous thing for like the kind of what diets you can do. Yuck, boy, poor kid. Knock wood, my biological systems, being non-human, I bioengineered myself a quite intractably functional thing. That's channeling Passepartout because that's basically what he did in the storyline. Well, I always hope that I can bring you some smiles on the face, and that when you look at the shows or read the books or deal with any of that stuff or think back on memories on things that humor is absolutely critical. That it certainly is for me. If I couldn't, sometimes some shit is so frustrating that the only thing you can do is make a joke at it. And or as Bette Midler once said in one of the things there, I think when she was going to go to Germany, and she's Jewish, and so there was this background bit and how frustrating that was, and she was making some snarky jokes about it. And he said, "F them if they can't take it." And that's how I get through my life. Ooh, boy, kids with the feeding tube, yeah. Hang in there, kid. Hopefully the technology will improve to make the treatments and things more amenable, but a feeding tube is just ick. Yeah, blah, pee. I bioengineer you a whole new body, but I have to give my spaceship 100 years warning on it to be able to do all of the circuitry. So we have to skip that part. Anyway, oh, hi, another member of the thing. We have a whole people of the midnight vampire hour here as we slide into Monday morning. The temperature's starting to rise here in Spokane. My niece and her husband came over and put a little cooler device in my back bedroom and that, so I can pump air conditioning air around and supplement the pumping of the furnace and that in this area. So they seem to have some idea they don't want me to roast during the summer. So we're supposed to be getting a little bit back into normal temperatures, which we've had kind of under the radar temperatures here for a while, but we're supposed to be getting into the 80s and 90s again, which is normal for the season. Whether or not we're going to have much hotter than that, I don't know. Hopefully we can get through the summer we've had an awful lot of rain, which has been helpful for drought conditions and all that. So we'll see what's going on. And I keep in the back of my mind knowing that back in the 60s and 70s, this is when they still had the normal Colorado River and all of that there was serious talk from Southern California about building pipes up to take Columbia water. And now that we're moving into a much more dangerous thing, that the Colorado River is actually drying up and Glen Canyon's looking like a canyon again, and that they're going to have to deal with that part or figure out how to do mucho desalinization. It wouldn't surprise me if some try to do more siphoning, but I'm terribly sorry, we're not sharing our water up here. As long as we can maintain a solid Columbia River, it's an essential part of our agricultural system up here, which will have a very interesting dynamic because our wine industry is doing just splendidly. Britain is actually starting up to doing wines. You know who may not be growing wines much longer? France and Italy. The temperatures there are getting to the point where they're starting to have serious diebacks from a lot of their grapes because it's just getting too hot for them. So welcome to the 21st century, kids. It's a different world. So anyway, yeah, you're in about the same time frame as we are, and we can anticipate these sort of climate shifts. The Pacific Northwest looks more stable in a lot of the climate modeling, and this has been the case for quite a long while, than some areas. Kansas and other areas may be in for really serious droughts, and there'll be practically nothing they can do about it. And family farms, they'll have to leave. All the area barrier islands along the East Coast are like practically doomed. In the long term, sea level rise is going to chomp off about a third of Florida. So what will happen farther down the line when property values start plummeting and people, how are they going to move when no one will buy their property? Because it's worthless. So that's going to be funky. To what extent will we need to build a storm surge protector across the Verrazano Straits to protect New York from flooding? A big chunk of New York City is built on landfill. Even to this day, relatively minor flood surges are flooding the subways and all of that down there. All of that's the part that was put out on landfill. Huge chunks of San Francisco, of course, they had their problems with liquefaction from the spots that were landfill. Those of you who have read Paralogs of Phileas Fogg will recall the fishermen out on the pier when the General Grant arrives in San Francisco in December of 1872. That pier, if you were to get in the time machine and come to the present, all of that bayment in that zone at the very south end of San Francisco at that time is all land. It's buildings, because all of that was filled in. They were actually tearing apart hills like mad, and about the only ones they kept intact was Nob Hill because it was too big to take down, too rocky, and Telegraph Hill and Queen and some of the others. So you got they were dumping stuff down into the bay and creating more land that way, and that process continued all the way into the 20th century when, of course, the liquefaction. Oh, speaking of liquefaction, yes, I was just studying a bit. Sand dunes can form, and huge things called ergs, E-R-G, are all over the place. There's 3 giant ergs in the Sahara Desert. There's some in China and various other locations. They're massive, specialized sand dunes. And that in principle, in tectonic activity periods, that stuff can kind of go wiggle, wiggle, and squish, and bloop, and it gets shot up as intrusions and all that. And creationists, of course, are insisting, well, this is impossible. This has to occur during the flood. Yeah, so I think that's going to be another little footnote that's going to be popping up in Rocks 2. For those of you who like Rocks 1, boy, you're going to like Rocks 2 because there's so much neat stuff in there, as well as one chapter that will be an update chapter where we'll be talking about the recent technical work and stuff that relates to the stuff that we brought up. Yes, Handoretta, finally a Catch One Live. Yeah, well, this will probably be the time from now on because the connections at this time of day are just way better than they were before, and it's comfortable for me. I'm a night owl anyway, and so actually it's in a nice comfortable time frame to do a show at this hour. And in the winter time, it's, I got the heater on and so forth and so on, but in the summertime, nice. And so I'm only going to bed in the wee hours when the crack of dawn is coming up, and it's actually at the coolest time so it works out quite nicely. And I've got my writing material and things to work with on the various projects. So anyway, keep an eye out for Paralogs 2. And if you haven't bought Paralogs 1, time's a wasting. You can pick that one up. All of you like mysteries and science fictions and historical thing, you could read it just for the history. That apart from all the whiz-bang flying airships and all the stuff that's nicking around in there, all the background historical information is 100% accurate. So the things about the gun shop in San Francisco, the Passepartout goes to buy his Colt revolvers, real place. The Clabro brothers aren't made up. And the walk around through San Francisco and all of that, the descriptions of what the places and all that look like are absolutely correct for December of 1872. I'll be doing the same thing there's a huge grand episode where we're visiting the Centennial Exhibition in 1876 in Philadelphia in the second Fogg novel, and all sorts of mayhem and things are happening in there, in addition to all the fun, funky stuff of the displays of things, and the Krupp cannons, and the early telephone being displayed, and the monorail, and the buttered popcorn dispense vendors, and all the stuff that's going on in that bit. And it was hot as Hades that summer. That's another bit that's all historically accurate of the temperatures started climbing into the hundreds. And if anyone who's been to Philadelphia knows humidity, that's like, God, 100 degrees is just horrific. So it was actually caused quite a lot of problems for the attendants. The fire hazard was so great that they were going to keep the fair was designed to be lit with gaslight, and there would be all sorts of fun stuff. People would stay there at night and see everything with the gaslight. But the fire hazards and the temperatures were so hot that they were terrified of it. So they shut the thing down at dusk and never did use the gas lamps at the Centennial exhibition. Oh, anyway, that gives you some teaser points for the second novels. I can't resist World's Fairs. That's and anything in that context, that's the Hitchcock style, because you always love to have suspense moments taking place in places of frivolity. So amusement parks and World's Fairs and all that. I've got the 1878 exposition in Paris coming up, and of course the great 1889 exposition in Paris, the one with the Eiffel Tower. We got the Chicago exposition in 1893. Not entirely sure how I'll be working in the Buffalo exhibition. That's the one where McKinley gets bumped and makes Teddy Roosevelt. And then there's also the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904. There's a bunch of stuff going on there. So step off the plane into a wall of water, Florida blue goats in the early 90s. Yes. Yeah, I've been to Florida. In fact, the few times I have been there, like at Disney World, there would suddenly be flash rainstorms and all of that. You'd have to duck underneath the stuff. That's when I was doing my Nat Park research. And in some respects, I'm glad I never built Nat Park at the time, because we'd have to reconfigure everything for COVID pandemic mode. So yeah, if I can ever do it, I'll be able to do a Mark III version that will be much more practical. So anyway, I've prattled on. I'll be putting the links up then to all the material on the slime molds and stuff. We'll see whether or not I can ferret out where Jensen is getting some of his material from. So I've still got in the back of my head that 2019 paper that he did on the population curves, where somehow or other he stacked up information that is not populations as if it is population growth to make it match the flood scenario and the population growth in that. And it leads him to just idiotic conclusions, where he's got haplotypes that are known from the Stone Ages showing up where he thinks that they only are appearing in medieval Europe. I mean, it's just hilariously bad stuff. Anyway, so everybody stay safe. If you're in a hot zone, worry about that. If you're in like Tornado Alley, which is what's happening, and we're beginning into hurricane season, even worse on there. There's so many different things that can go wrong in so many different places. And then, of course, nutballs with guns going around shooting people. And then the Omicron COVID thing, we're still uncertain. At the moment, it's mild enough and contained enough that we're not going back to mask usage here in Washington State. And with a little luck, we won't worry about that. And then, of course, there's monkeypox, which I don't really have to worry about unless I plan on rubbing into somebody who has had monkeypox. And that's really unlikely in my present circumstances. And we'll see what else happens. And then, of course, we have a midterm election coming up where the fate of the republic is at stake. And interesting times, children. Interesting times. I don't like interesting times. I want my 2001: A Space Odyssey future back. We've lost all of that. Oh no, I have not only not contracted it. I have vaccinated and boosted, and I am invulnerable to viruses and bacteria. My opinion is that I talk them to death. That no virus or bacterium can stand being around me long enough to do any damage. So I typically do not get ill from things, or if I do encounter a virus, it just flits in and out. So anyway, yes, I never got any COVID and stuff. We all had to be really careful when we went over. I have a great grandniece that was just a newborn, and she's now in toddler mode. And my niece was extremely concerned to make sure that everybody got tested and swabbed and so forth and so on, to make sure that there was nothing encountering her, so that she could get through this particular period. So anyway, oh, good Lordy, yes, you got Omicron back in January. Yes, well, as I said, knock wood, I will continue to be non-human here. I enjoy working with human beings and find my relationships mating. And that's how I can channel my inner Passepartout in the second novel. So anyway, see you all next week. Everybody stay safe and all the rest. And theoretically be back here next week. We will shut down the stream. We're over a whole hour. It worked. Yay. And take care, kid, you and your little hose. Oh, if I were a deity, I would go zot, and you would be in so much better shape.